Good evening and welcome to the Strand. I'm Christina Foxley, the Director of Events, and I'm thrilled to introduce our great friends, the husband and wife team, Art Spiegelman and Françoise Mouly, to the Strand. Art and Francoise, two of the best-known creators and editors in the field, are here tonight to show images from their new book, The TOON Treasury of Classic Children's Comics, an unprecedented volume of the funniest, wackiest, and best-told tales from the golden age of comic books. In 1992, Art Spiegelman earned a Pulitzer Award for his graphic memoir Mouse, A Survivor's Tale, and in 2005 was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. His most recent book of comics for adults is Breakdowns, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Blank. His most recent book of comics for kids is Jack in the Box from TOON Books. Françoise Mouly is an artist and designer. She co-edited with Art the groundbreaking comics anthology Raw from 1980 to 1991. She is the art editor of The New Yorker, as well as the publisher and editorial director of TOON Books, many of which we have here tonight. Following their presentation, Art and Françoise will take your questions. I'll be wandering around with this microphone, so please stand and wait for it before you speak. And then there'll be signed copies of their books for you, and maybe some tote bags as well. The books available on the cart, we have Breakdowns, any of the TOON books, and of course the TOON Treasury of Comics. Art and Françoise would be happy to sign for you. You can purchase the books downstairs on your way out of the store. Photography is permitted, but please at this time turn off your flashes so it doesn't disrupt the slideshow. Please join me in welcoming two of the greatest authorities in the comics world, Art Spiegelman and Françoise Mouly, to the Strand.
So, the most influential was back in 2005, and I remain with relatively little influence, but I was allowed to smoke here, so I apologize for it, but it makes me a lot more comfortable in public.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I'm not sure that we are the most influential, but certainly I know that what we are bringing tonight is what we love, which is our personal investment in the treasures of great comics for kids that informed that stuff that we read to our children when they were young. And it's also, as we said in the dedication to the book, our way of building a future. It's not just turning to the past, but also creating a future that we would want to live in for our grandchildren to share in our love of books and our love of comics. In 1980, when I first met Art, it was through reading one of his comic strip that he had done about his mother's suicide. And I was shocked as a young architecture student at the time by his ability to combine his own personal, emotional investment in his relationship with his mother with all of the historical forces that were at work. When we decided to do Raw magazine, it was really born out of a love of works that wasn't being published anywhere else at the time, that nobody else was interested in, that included some of the European comics that Art had discovered when we had visited Europe, some of Little Lulu and the kids' comics, and the grand tradition of American comics that I had discovered when I met Art, when he was reading Winsor McCay and George Harriman and some of the wonderful American comics to me, and our interest in the art world. In Raw, we also ended up publishing what Art was working on at the time, which was his own narrative that, once again, was bringing together his own intimate relationship with his father together with larger historical forces around it. Eventually, 13 years later, it got gathered into what later was called the graphic novel, and published as Mouse, and got him the Pulitzer Prize. And in that whole lengthy process of 10 or 15 years of fighting hard to make sure that comics were not just for children, were taken seriously as a form of personal and personal expression for artistic and literary expression. We realized years later, 15, 20 years later, when our kids were born, that one thing that had gotten papered over, swept under the rug, was comics for kids. Now comics were in museums, they were in libraries, they were the subject of courses in the university, but there was nothing for our kids when they were growing up or for their friends. There were no more Little Lulus and the great classics. That was a radical shift from the golden age of comics, which is pretty much started as comic books, started as a derivation from comic strip at the end of the 30s and got gathered into pamphlets that kids could buy on their own. This is a page by Jules Pfeiffer, who at the time was starting out as a young cartoonist, and they were ubiquitous by the end of the 40s and the 50s in that golden age. When Art and I decided to do a raw junior division and publish comics for children, we went to the core of what we think of literature for children, which is fairy tales and the stories that have inspired, I think, any writer and creator is still being formed by the stories they read as children, as opposed to what a lot of contemporary media for kids tends to be an ironic commentary. If you look at the Shrek movie, it's very different from the Shrek book, whereas what we wanted to do for kids was not a parody of the adult media world, simplified for children, but to go back to that pleasure of basic stories. After the Little Lit collections of books, we recently started a collection of individual books of comics, and those are more specifically for the child at the moment where she's entering into school, and the moment where she should be discovering the pleasure of reading, which is, I think, a really truly unique medium in terms of giving you access to an author's point of view. So the TOON books are comics for early readers in kindergarten, first and second grade. One of the things that I got interested in working with educators is understanding that process of becoming literate. And becoming literate in the U.S. too often means moving away from pictures. And so many teachers think that by the time the kid reaches second grade, they should be able to read real books and therefore not need pictures as crutches. In fact, literacy includes visual literacy, I think, and you're much better off if you are going along with the kids' instinctive interest in images, because the images parallels the way we decode the world. This is an image d'Épinal, which is the French literature for kids in the 18th century, and does, in the form of a game, show you how we interpret every image in terms of its semantics and in its meaningful elements. So here you see an image of a little girl reading a book.